Like most things in the tradition of Western intellectual thought, it begins in the East. Turkey today, a little town called Miletus. Miletus, while it is no longer on the coast in 600 BC, was a thriving trade town, coastal town. It's now been silted in, so it's pretty far inland. But in this Greek trading town, there was an individual who, whether he deserves it or not, gets credit for being the father of not just Greek philosophy, but the father of science, geometry. He's sometimes credited as being the father of astronomy. In fact, he's credited with far too many things that he could actually have come up with. But the important thing is, in the rest of the Western tradition, he's considered to be the first. He's one of the 7 sages, as they call him. I can't name any of the other 6. But his name is Thales of Miletus. And in this little town of Miletus, this trading town, Thales was kind of a general polymath. He was known for a lot of different things, including supposedly having gone to Egypt to learn all his wonderful science and math, because that's where a good Greek went to learn the secrets of the universe. But some of the things Thales is most famous for are things that we would admire to this day. Quite memorably, Aristotle mentions that Thales could predict weather. He had learned the systems of nature so well that he could tell when a season was going to be rainy or not rainy. Now, predicting weather is a pretty cool thing to do. It's pretty valuable in a lot of ways. But Thales did something that's going to be important for all of Western tradition, and maybe what actually sets it apart as a unique intellectual tradition. Thales decided to use that knowledge to make as much money as he could. He corners the olive press market in a year when he knows there's going to be an abundant number of olives, thanks to his knowledge of the weather patterns of his area. And because of his monopoly on olive presses, he makes a fortune. And for Aristotle, this is, admittedly, Aristotle's getting a jibe in here. This is proof that if a philosopher wanted to, he could be the richest man in the world. And so the only reason I suppose Aristotle's not the richest man in the world is because he cares about more important things than things like commerce and trade. But what's interesting is it seems like it's commerce and trade that maybe led to this kind of awakening of a new sort of system of thought in Thales and Miletus. We actually know that after Thales, there's a number of other prominent Greek philosophers, thinkers, and scientists, Anaximenes and Anaximander, who are awesome names, but supposedly followers of Thales himself. It's interesting, but throughout, at least intellectual history, you tend to see kind of blossomings, flowerings, I don't know what you want to call it, of new intellectual thought in between spaces, at the edges, in the borders, whether that is Athens on the edge of the great Eastern empires, whether that is Jena in the middle of Germany during the Romantic movement, or whether that is in Philadelphia, a little trading town, where you see just kind of an aggregate of intellect and really new thinking. And there's been various takes on why that is, interpretations. One is that when you have a trading town, you are by definition exposed to all kinds of different explanations. In Miletus, as trade came from Turkey, as trade came from mainland Greece, as it came from Asia, as it came from the Caucasus Mountains, as it came from all over the Black Sea, it's a central trading point where people would have come to exchange their goods. And this is certainly not an economics lecture, nor am I qualified to teach one, but one thing I do know is that if you want to trade things efficiently, you need to understand a common value, a common property. In other words, there needs to be some sort of common thing behind it all. Cash, money, those giant Laplander stones, whatever it is, it needs to be the thing that connects everything together. In other words, the idea that there is something, that means that if I know how much this cow is, I can somehow extrapolate that to know how much that boat is. And that's a weird thought. that there is something in the cow that is inherently the same as something that is in the boat. That I could give you a boat amount of cows in exchange for that. And this idea seems to be kind of the driving force behind Thales' development, or at least partially some of his development. You see this in his development of geometry. In geometry, we don't need to go into all this, but he pointed out a few observations of what is the nature of a circle. And it's a small leap in geometry, as I understand it, but it's a big leap in intellectual thinking. The fact that a circle here and a circle in Egypt and a circle on the moon all have something about them that connects them is a uniquely, well, as far as we know at this point, a uniquely Greek idea. When it came to astronomy, when it came to measurement, when it came to abstract math, especially algebra, or the beginnings of algebra, I guess you'd say, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, they could handle all that. In fact, they're probably better at it than the Greeks were. This idea of geometry is some idea that this and that thing are connected deep down. And here's the almost arrogant notion behind it, not only is there something behind things that connects them together and gives them a unity, but I can know that thing. I can actually look at it. So if I know circle A, I magically know circle B. As boring as it is to us in a classroom, it is a remarkable idea that there is somewhere behind it all a universal, or at least a general. Thales and the universal are a little bit tricky. There's at least a general principle, if not a universal, that connects things that seem to have nothing to do with each other. In fact, it's this idea that the Greeks are going to fight over and argue, and to be fair, we continue to fight over and argue to this day in intellectual history. So Thales is, to speculate wildly here, thinking about what is it that connects things together. So for value, it's money. What is everything worth? It's worth this amount of money. It's worth this specie, this currency. But what is it about everything that connects it to everything? And Thales does go pretty far here. He doesn't just say that cows have cow A has something in common with cow B. I don't know why I picked cows as the metaphor here, but you get the idea. Baseball here has something in common with baseball there. But the trade mentality, the merchant's mentality, is this idea that everything is united by something, right? The great cry of the market, everything has its price. Well, Thales takes that idea and says everything has its common constituent part. And he picks something that makes a lot of sense. He says everything, every object, every mountain, every toddler is composed of the same thing. They're made out of water. Water is the thing out of which all other things are made. To be fair, he doesn't technically say that we know. We don't have a lot of his writings. That interpretation is, I believe, Plato's interpretation. He says something like everything comes from water and then goes to water. Kind of like from dust created, returns to dust is his actual language. But if he does mean that the basic component of everything is water, which he is certainly assumed to mean by later philosophers, then if I can learn something about one thing in one spot in one instance, maybe I can apply that to every other instance. Because if the rock I drop off my table is made out of the same thing that a rock that is dropped off no table is made out of, maybe if I can find out what happens here, I can know what happens. This is the bare minimum requirement for scientific inquiry, for even knowledgeable inquiry. There has to be some general factor between disparate things in order for me to have knowledge that's in any way applicable anywhere else. And so everything is water, right? So if I know something here, I can know it there. There's a famous reference in a Greek writer whose name immediately fled my mind, where a man was bragging famously, and he said, in Rhodes, in the long jump, I jumped, I don't know what's long for a long jump. In the long jump, I jumped 30 feet, which may or may not be impressive. I'm not really up on long jumping. And the response to him by a philosopher at the time was, well, this is just like roads, jump here. In other words, if you can jump 30 feet at roads, you can jump 30 feet here. And if you can't jump 30 feet here, I don't believe you can jump 30 feet in roads. There must be a common factor between those two things. And for Thales, the common factor between jumping in roads and jumping here is that you're made out of water, the ground's made out of water, it's all made out of water. Water is the common thing that unites it, and it allows for a transmissible knowledge from one thing to something else. That this water connects everything means that I can know the thing beyond it. And it does something else as well. It's not that Thales, or the Greeks in general, were the first to think that sitting behind all the sensational things of life, the things we can touch and feel, that there must be something else. There must be something behind it that explains it. That's pretty much universal. Most often the explanation was that there is a spirit behind each thing, animism, paganism as we call it. What Thales is doing, and this is really important, is he's saying the thing behind material things is itself a material. In that regard, he is a materialist, little m materialist. He is saying, and this is an important moment, materials are real, and materials are what makes up other materials. In other words, a material thing has a material cause. Now, in Thales' defense, he does believe in spirit, he does believe in souls, although he actually believes everything is made of souls. Quite famously, he says that both the magnet and the metal most have souls because they're attracted to each other, because they have forces acting upon them. So it's possible by soul, he means more in the sense of what we think of as force. But for the Greeks, Aristotle, for instance, soul and force, they're both anima. They both animate. And so you have this idea that, again, material things have material causes. And material things can be known. And if we can know the material things behind something, we can know and predict and maybe fix the things that go materially wrong. Now, I should add, it's fair to say that while water is really important, not everything is made out of water. But it's not the fact that Thales got everything right. Although his geometry, I should say, it's pretty spot on. His geometry, he got that right. But in his scientific theory, he doesn't necessarily exactly capture the exact constituent, but there is there the important idea, and maybe the distinctly Western idea, is that material things have knowable material causes. And he does something else that's important here. You would think that if you could predict crop prices, the best thing to do is to tell no one how to do it. Like there's no reason to share that information. Literally, the more people who know this, the more people you compete against, the more money you lose. And so it's likely that there have been countless great thinkers in ancient history who've come up with very similar ideas. But it doesn't become part of the Western tradition if you keep your knowledge, your ideas to yourself. And what Thales does is he shares the information. We know he tells students because he has a long lineage of students. He is a teacher. And he is a teacher who, certainly it seems, encourages teaching. And that's one of the most Western ideas of Western thinking. Admittedly, it's happening in Turkey. The idea that if you have knowledge, that knowledge gets shared, not just with the priesthood, not just with your guild, not even just with your family, but that there is a public space. Again, this goes back to the whole market town, right? You cannot trade your goods, or rather, you can't trade your goods as well unless you're all standing in the crowded room yelling at each other. And if we have this market of goods, well, the market of ideas works kind of in the same way. We have our open space where you go and teach and maybe even debate and argue and fight over these various ideas. And not only do you debate, argue, and fight about these various ideas, this is the other key part of this. Thales' ideas make predictions. His ideas are not just descriptive. They're not just kind of summaries of grand theories. He is making predictions. And in the case of the olive crop, he can prove that he knows something. And he can prove it not with just being right, but he can prove with the one thing that convinces everybody, which is cash, right? He can make the money. He has the cash. He can show this is right. And it is probably most famous moment, at least for the ancients. And this is really where, if depending on how much of this story is actually factual, this is a major moment. Apparently, according to the legend, and that's all we have at this point, he correctly predicts a solar eclipse. Now, this is a huge jump, right? This is a huge jump. He is not only saying that I can observe material things and predict earthly stuff. It's one thing to, get the great olive crop in, but the olive crop, that's earthly things. The solar eclipse happens in heaven. It happens in the realm of the gods. It is caused by gods. The sun is a god. They don't understand what an eclipse is, but it's understood these are celestial matters. And what Thales is doing is he is saying that I can take this same principle, that there is something beyond the physical world that I can know, and I can predict things in what we now know that the sun and moon are physical world, but it wasn't clear back then that these were physical objects. In fact, it probably was blasphemous to claim that you could predict these things from physical explanations. And so when he accurately predicts the behavior of the gods of the heavens, there is a moment there where suddenly there's a form of knowledge that can be transmitted, can be studied, can be known, and that still contains a universal truth. But it's a universal truth unlike the truth given by the Greek gods, because the universal truth given by the Greek gods are secrets. They are mysteries. They are things passed down only through the priesthood, only to the chosen few. This is a universal that anyone can learn, can be taught to anyone, can be passed on to anyone as well. And this is a big step in what we call the Western tradition. This idea of testable predictions, this idea of even kind of shareable knowledge. It's certainly not unique to the Western world. It's certainly not unique to this part of Turkey. But it'll be an instrumental part of what we call the Western intellectual movement going forward. Now, Thales himself, in addition to his various other acclamations, became, as philosophers or famous thinkers or speakers often do, a bit of a legend himself. I mean this quite literally. What we know about him is legendary. One of the most famous stories about him, I now realize I think I've said one of the most famous stories for everything I've shared, but they must be famous or I wouldn't have heard of them, is there's a story that I believe Plato tells to try to make a point about philosophy and philosophers. And it is that Thales, while watching the stars, the heavens, remember he predicted an eclipse, he's an astronomer, he's amazed by the heavens, the stars, the things beyond, right? Thales, while walking and looking at the stars, falls into a well and dies, right? Who knows if this is true? Who knows if this is how he dies? But for Plato, it makes a point. The philosopher who has his head in the clouds trips and hurts himself, right? You can't just focus on the things beyond and ignore the things below. Now, to be fair, if anyone could be accused of that issue, it's Plato more than Thales, but it gets the idea across that we should be practical-minded, right? What are these philosophers with their head in the clouds, head in the skies? What is it that they're doing? They're ignoring the world below. And it's very unfair to Thales if this is the story that's gone around about him, because he did focus on the things below. This idea that the laws, the rules at least, the facts of our experience expands around us, apply to other places and other things, creates that kind of trade marketplace of ideas, the opportunity to compare, the fact that there is a world that is knowable. There is a world we have access to. Despite all the things that happen, there is something behind it. And that something behind it not only helps explain what we see around us, but that something behind it is something that we can know, we can work with, and at times can even predict. And this question of what is it? Why is it that I can know one thing at one moment and it have relevance at another thing at another moment is going to drive Western thought from that point on. It's the great question that drives Plato and Aristotle. What is it that combines disparate things together? Is it more real than the thing itself? Is it innate inside of them? And to this day, we are fighting over what is it that is universal in anything, in humans, in nature. What is it that combines all those things together? And legend or not, the stories, at least, of Thales and the ideas he spread at least contribute to the beginning of that quest for what is the universal, but also what is the knowable. And once we attain any knowledge, of either of those, what do we do with it? Do we hide it in a priesthood? Do we hide it in a secret club? Or is it a marketplace? Is it a space where these ideas, understandings, these concepts of what's beyond, what's more, what connects, are hashed out to see who makes the most money off the next olive crop?